Okay, thank you, Bethany. We'll go ahead and get started. It's 1 o'clock here, February 16th. We will get going and call the meeting to order. I do want to mention the staff had reached out to me, and just as a reminder, if you do make a motion or have comments on items, if you could just state your name and your agency, and turn your camera on as well if you're comfortable with that. You don't have to, but at least state your name and the agency, just so our note takers can track the motions and the comments more orderly. But with that, we will look at approval of the agenda. So does anybody have changes to the agenda today? Okay, seeing none, we will move forward with the approval of the January 19th minutes. And I do want to thank Carl Keel for chairing that meeting in my absence. So thank you for that, Carl. So we will need a motion and a second, and then also with this action, the staff will have the ability to take roll call as well. Nathan, you have your hand up? Nathan, if you're trying to talk, you're on mute. Okay, do we have a motion and a second?
This is Carl Keel from Bloomington, and I'd move approval of the minutes.
All right, thank you, Carl Keel from Bloomington moves the minutes. Do we have a second?
Maddie Dahlheimer, Washington County, will second.
Okay, thank you, Maddie. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. And I'll hand it over to staff for roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Jerry OJ.
Aye.
Darren Milkey.
Here.
Jenna Fabish. Or John Sass. Jason Piper.
Aye.
Scott Merrick.
Aye.
Adam Jessen.
Aye.
Maddie Dahlheimer.
Aye.
Elaine Kotsukos. Scott Janowiak.
Aye.
Molly McCartney.
Aye.
Colleen Brown.
Aye.
Innocent Ao.
Aye.
Mike Samuelson.
Aye.
Nancy Spooner Walsh.
Aye.
Vicky Laurer.
Aye.
Carl Keel.
Aye.
Paul Omi. Robert Ellis.
Aye.
Jim Koslucher. Ken Ashfeld.
Aye.
Michael Thompson.
I'll abstain.
Nathan Coster.
Aye.
And Ann Weber. And I do see Cole's comment about getting skipped. Sorry about that. I have Cole Henniker.
Aye.
And did I miss anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Right, and that is approved. It doesn't mean you're unimportant, Cole. So
Yeah, and I just wanted that we were in a meeting with Elaine earlier, and I know she was having audio trouble, so just a note there.
okay, thank you for that note. And it's a little late now, but Nathan, I just saw your question about the agenda before we move on. Do you just want to make a comment?
Yeah, is my mic working now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say, I know in the past, like we get agendas that have been pretty packed and it seems like these have ones been skipped before. And I was just curious to see if staff had a reason, maybe that the regional solicitation one, number 3, was the most important, and if that one had to go first, just because of the conversations at TAB and that time sensitivity there. So that's what I just wanted to highlight, because I know in the past we have had agenda items like get delayed or have to be pushing to another cycle. So that was the only thing I was wondering about, is if we believe we have enough time and they're in the right order of importance.
Okay. I assume, Bethany, if we had something time sensitive and needed action, it would be a business item, but I assume we can get through most of these items today. Is that your understanding? Or information items?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the first 2 items from Tony Fischer should be relatively brief.
Okay, you hear that, Tony? You're going to be on the clock.
How about 1 out of 2, Chair?
Okay, next we have public comment on committee business. Do we have any from the public, Bethany, that would want to comment on our business today?
We have not received any public comment requests.
Okay, next we'll move on to the TAB report. So I don't know if Elaine is available yet or not.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. For some reason it didn't come through when I responded aye before. But anyway, TAB met yesterday afternoon, and for the chair's report, Chair Hovland reported that the executive committee discussed IIJA and grant opportunities that we can take advantage of as a region, and we'll try to get a consultant that is helping MnDOT to present on the opportunities. The option that was discussed was setting aside regional solicitation funds, similar to setting aside the innovation funds for grant opportunities, and if not used, roll it back into the regional solicitation. So that was just an idea that was discussed. And then Chair Hovland welcomed the new TAB members and alternates. We had new citizen rep Mark Jenkins. TAB District F was the brand new, and then Jess Robertson from Blaine, who had replaced Julie Jepson, who moved up to Anoka County. And then Chair Hovland announced that the first vice chair would be Mark Windshuttle, and the second vice chair, Trista Mata Castillo, and the TAB liaison will continue to be Peter DeCan, who presents items at the Transportation Committee. MnDOT report, Michael Barnes reported on the Corridors of Commerce funding. The packages that were submitted are getting their final cost estimates and support letters, which were due March 1st. And the projects will be evaluated and announcements made in May for the $200 million funding, with half of that for the metro area. And there have been about 20 fatalities this year, which are a couple fewer than the previous year. The MAC report, Carl Kerman's reported on additional airport numbers. In 2022, there were over 32 million passengers. And for international passengers, there was a large increase from last year. 2021 was 740,000 passengers to over 2 million in 2022. For the Met Council report, Deb Barber reported on the Met Council listening sessions that are starting for the Transportation Policy Plan, and that the council member finalists have been forwarded to the governor for appointment by March 6th. Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen reported that Southwest Transit is partnering with Lyft to provide an on-demand service with an app environment, and it's nearing implementation. And then MBTA is finalizing a raised grant application for Burnsville Transit Station Mobility Hub. And the Suburban Transit Association also hosted a legislative breakfast at the Capitol. For the TAC report, Jennifer Hager reported that the funding and programming will be reviewing the scope change policy. So just a heads up that that's coming forward at a recommendation of TAC, and it was last updated in 10 years. And so they would like the funding and programming to review and see if updates are needed. And then for business items, they approved the adoption of the PM2 and PM3 performance targets that came through the TAC Planning Committee. And they adopted several streamlined tip amendments. One was for adding 3 new projects. The other was 3 scope changes and cost changes. And they approved 3 program year extension requests that came through funding and programming, and the 2 scope changes that also came through this group. And then they heard an update on the transportation policy plan update and the regional solicitation update, which is on the agenda for today. And then there was just a question by one of the members if on TAB's position to lobby for change for the Minnesota open meeting law. And our assumption was that the League of Minnesota Cities would be the one who sponsored it, with others signing on, but we haven't heard anything yet. And that's what I have for a report.
All right, thank you, Elaine. Innocent, if you could mute your mic.
Oh, okay.
Some background coming in. And just a reminder, if you aren't speaking, just to make sure to triple check your mute button status. Okay, any questions for Elaine on the TAB report? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Elaine. We will move along to information, because business, we do not have any items today. So our first informational item will be the Climate Action Work Plan. Jeff and Tony, I will turn it over to you guys.
You want me to start, Tony? One moment. Thank you, Chair and members. I'm just going to pull up the presentation here. Yeah, so my name is Tony Fischer, Transportation Planner in MTS, and I'm going to help Jeff with a couple of slides that are specific to the Metropolitan Planning Organization part of the Met Council, but overall, I'm going to pass it off to Jeff.
Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Jeff Freeman. I am a sustainability engineering manager within Metro Transit. Today, we want to present our climate action work plan. We've been working on this for approximately 2+ years. We attempted to make this presentation in last fall to this group, and as somebody noted earlier, sometimes the agenda gets long and things get delayed, and here we are updating this group based on a plan that the council adopted back in middle of December. Next. Our plan, what our plan really does here that we've worked on is we know that we've been working along in various parts of the council on climate action probably since 2016 in a somewhat focused realm where we were taking in some of the ideas and things that we were doing and trying to create projects. A lot of them were sustainability focused. Some had climate mitigation aspects to it. We also know that we had started back as early as probably 2000 working on projects that had some sort of climate sustainability edge to them. Most of those were economically driven. We, switching out T12 bulbs to T8s and things like that. Many of you may have remember Jason Willett working in ES, making the big push for community solar gardens and the work that was happening at that time. So ultimately, yes, this plan builds upon our existing efforts. We went through and we defined our commitments, strategies, and actions for our plan. We'll get into some of those as we go through there. And it really reinforces the pledge we made within MSP 2040 to become a climate leader. And with that, well, we have an environmental justice component in here as we start leading into our equity. Next. Here we are with the timeline that, as you said, we're now in Q1 2023, and we began the process of implementing the plan. Again, we adopted the plan at the end of 2022. Right now, we're just getting going on the plan implementation. Surprisingly, the legislative session has taken up a bit of time from some of the folks that were leading this work before, and we're still in the mode to advance this work yet this year and get a number of these items moving forward. Next. a peek at our emissions. You know, we talk about this being this plan being internally focused on our operations, our planning, and the work we do. Our leading contributors for electricity are, not surprising, wastewater treatment is an energy intensive operation. Light rail, and then you see our facilities coming in at the top there in green. And we know that within our facilities we have opportunities to advance some of this work and reduce our consumption. Next. Our mobile combustion, not surprising. I think that was the biggest surprise here. Metro Transit uses a considerable amount of diesel fuel. That orange block from Transportation Services is paratransit for the most part, primarily gasoline in those those F450s and F350 chassis, those smaller buses. There's almost as many vehicles in the MTS fleet as there's in the transit fleet, and they're actually running more miles. So I think that's an interesting opportunity for us, as opportunities exist in mid-sized, medium-duty vehicles where we can make improvements within our fleets to reduce our emissions impacts. Next. While we were working on this, the state of Minnesota came up with the Minnesota Climate Action Framework. For us, it was an opportunity to see what direction the state was taking, and we took a brief pause to make sure that the work we had outlined was going to dovetail and fit within the work that was outlined within the Climate Action Framework for the state. And again, this is internal to our planning and our operations. It's not a regional climate action plan. The chance for something like that is probably in the future. Maybe it is in the next regional development guide, but it's not within this plan. We've also looked at this thing as a 3 to 5 year time frame. 5 year probably gets to the point where it's being replaced. 3 years probably where we get to the point where we start looking at this again and reworking some of the things that we thought were important back in 2021, 2022. Check off the boxes, see where there's more opportunities, make sure, look at the things that we've got accomplished. Our plan does lay out 5 commitments and a number of strategies and actions to support them. Next. Our first commitment is we will incorporate environmental justice principles as we plan to implement and evaluate our climate action work. This is important to us. We know we have a number of prescriptive actions as it relates to equity and environmental justice, whether it be Title VI, just our normal run-of-the-day community engagement. I don't want to necessarily say it's run-of-the-day, but it's what we've been doing in the past. We've looked at this a lot, and we've had a lot of discussion, so much so that we were going to bring our environmental justice framework with a offshoot task force along with the CAB. And back in July, August, we said, no, this really needs to be dealt with on its own. And we'll be reformulating an environmental justice task force, cross-divisional, across the council, to further explore what our opportunities are and how we're going to do a better job in engagement, making sure we take the opportunities to repair what we can from the past, and certainly not create any further harm in burdened communities and places that in the past have maybe not seen as equitable treatment as they should have. Next. Commitment to accelerate emissions reductions from our operations to achieve carbon neutrality. This is the big one. This is easy for people to get their arms around. How do we use less energy? How do we look at opportunities to fuel switch where we can, moving in our fleets, moving from diesel to electric? How do we do a better job with our renewables? Where can we continue to push our carbon footprint down? Next. And again, in this vein, we also heard back. We held a number of meetings and focus groups with agencies and communities, as well as from what we consider our regional peers, as well as from some thought leaders within the region. And every group came back with the same ideas. They're looking to partner with the council where possible to find ways to accelerating regional emissions reductions through new partnerships, through existing partnerships. Our biggest partner right now is Excel. We have a commitment for a green energy commitment with Excel that's through 2040. And they've been a key player for us as we look to advance our zero emission bus program. Next. This is commitment for reducing our risks and impacts of climate change hazards to our facilities and our service. Within our group, we've talked about the idea that resiliency is really an outcome. It's the byproduct of our mitigation work with our adaptation, our ability to serve those who need us the most when it's the toughest. I think we saw some of those impacts during the COVID times, that as we reduce service, there are folks that felt that a lot harder than others. Some folks felt that a lot harder than others, and a lot of those folks came from the burdened communities. How do we make sure what we build, what we operate, stays operational for us? And what steps can we take to make it so, at the same time being conscious of our natural resources? So this is internal. We've been doing this work in the past. Becoming more conscientious of it is something we certainly look forward to doing in the future. Next. And not unlike commitment 3, where we talked about mitigating work with partners, we also look at collaborating with partners to advance the regional climate adaptation efforts. There are a lot of partnerships out there that we're part of, whether it's OES, Department of Transportation, MPCA. Where can we work together to provide our expertise, our leadership, share our tools that we've developed? We have a number of tools that, climate vulnerability assessments and things like that. How can we work together to advance this idea of adaptation? How can we make the regional stronger in the face of environmental impacts caused by climate change? Next.
Okay.
Back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Chair and committee members, so there are a lot of actions in this plan for every division of the council, but we wanted to give you the line by line run through of the actions for the MPO part of the council. So we have these divided into priority 1 and priority 2. Priority 1 are generally straightforward actions that we think are going to have significant impacts. And then priority 2 are just things that are a little bit more complicated, but are also important. So the first thing on the left here is the EV charging, EV public charging gap analysis that we have in the UPWP, and there were some slight modifications to that in the current amendment that's going through the committees right now. So just looking at the region, what charging exists for electric vehicles, what charging is committed to by a lot of different private and public utilities, others, and see what who might be being left behind, and what's kind of the scale of those gaps too. So the second one here is to a follow-up on the work that MnDOT did in their statewide multimodal transportation plan. They set a target of 20% VMT reduction per capita. And so we're going to do some follow-on work on that and see what the right thing for our region is to do, and have those conversations as part of the transportation policy plan. The third thing here is, to go beyond what the work we do in the transportation policy plan in terms of transportation, climate mitigation, and continue that conversation around what are the right actions and strategies for stakeholders here in the region to take to further mitigate transportation's greenhouse gas contributions. Then the last bullet here is, to work through the carbon reduction program with MnDOT, develop a framework for how those funds can best be used to achieve those goals. The top right is actually the subject of the next information item on today's agenda. It's develop greenhouse gas measures for the regional solicitation, the 4-year transportation improvement program, and then also looking at the TPP, the way we measure greenhouse gases there, really looking at the ways we do measure greenhouse gases, the places we don't measure greenhouse gases, and trying to recommend new methodologies that are both comprehensive, accurate, but also practically able to be implemented both for our partners and for the council staff. And then the second bullet in that second column there is just really to talk about starting to, probably a post-project task to really have those conversations around how we want to really implement those new recommendations for the greenhouse gas measures in the regional solicitation. And then the last bullet there is the lead travel demand management policy development and funding of programs in our region, especially following on the study that Cole is leading, the regional travel demand management study, implement those recommendations as best we can. So just a couple of priority 2 actions that we came up with. We recognize climate vulnerability is important work to be doing. A lot of our partners are doing work in that space and just want to have conversations about, is there a need at a regional level? Are there opportunities there for the council to support partners in that work? And then we also noted here that with the greenhouse gas measures that we recommend out of that project I'm going to talk about in a minute, I think implementing that in the TIP is going to be a longer term process. That's just kind of light on data. It's just harder to connect the dots of how we get from here to there. So we did put that as a priority 2 action. But with that, I think Jeff and I are happy to stand for questions or comments.
Okay, thank you for that presentation, Tony and Jeff. Do we have any comments or questions from the committee today?
Yeah, hi, this is Maddie Dahlheimer with Washington County. Thank you for the presentation. I certainly appreciate the charts, the mission charts, Jeff, that you had in kind of your earlier slides. I was curious, as part of that commitment 1 related to environmental justice, is there going to be any kind of mapping element within this scope of work where, say, we could map kind of where those emissions are occurring and layer that with some of that demographic information to understand, where there may be vulnerable populations or disenfranchised communities that are kind of bearing the brunt of some of these emissions, if that's the case, and use that to help maybe prioritize or identify strategies to either limit or mitigate the health impacts of these emissions? Or is that outside of the scope of this specific project?
Tony or Jeff?
Mr. Chair, Maddie Dahlheimer, I think this isn't necessarily a project. This is an umbrella that provides us, I don't want to call it the cover, but I guess that's the one way, is to engage in work. And we have had talks about within community development. They are working on greenhouse gas modeling tools, and that's one of our intents, is to be able to make some of this type of information, meet with the folks like yourself, to find out what kind of things you're interested in seeing us produce, and then go down that road to get these tools developed so other people can use them in the work they do, especially that they bring to the TAB and the TAC, so that as we start to see the regional solicitation evolve and require more information related to this area, that the information that is presented by everybody is consistent with, because it's all coming from the same tool. So I think part of that answer, I anticipate that we will be pursuing that kind of those kind of efforts. I know some of those things have been done to a certain level already through community development. Now the question is making sure we're comfortable with the work that the output that those tools are creating, and then making them available for everyone.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Maddie, any additional questions?
Not for me.
Okay. Innocent?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to inform the community that MPC just completed a greenhouse gas inventory report. Report was released last last week, and it's available for people by searching MPCA, or I can forward the information to staff that can forward to other people. And we set up energy goal in 2017 that was signed by the governor at that time, and we're supposed to, by 2015 at least, to have some reduction, but we did not. But with the new climate action framework that MPCA and other agencies worked, our staff just completed that inventory, part of it, and for the first time, they show a 23% reduction in greenhouse gas during all of them, and more on the transportation, which currently is the one that contribute more in the state. And the report also shows that if we continue with that level, that we should be able to reach the carbon neutrality by 2050, like we have in the frame action plan. So I will be probably forward that to the staff so that they can distribute to the members. There are a lot of information on that, not only transportation, but land use, electricity, and other forms of sources that reduce greenhouse gases. That's what I have.
Okay, thank you, Innocent. Yeah, if you want to share that report with the staff, I'm sure they can get that out to the group and provide some more enlightening information on this topic and the things that the PCA are currently involved with. So thank you, Innocent.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, any other comments or questions before we move on to information item number 2? Okay, seeing none. Tony, you got the second item. I'll hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you, Chair. So here's where we're going to make up some time. I have essentially 3 slides here. It might be a little bit dense, so this is the Regional Transportation Climate Change Multimodal Measures Study. And this is where we are really looking at the way we measure or don't measure greenhouse gases, but present new and better methodologies to do that. And then we're actually going to run those methodologies through some past projects, the past long-range plan, and see what how those estimates come out. So let me jump into this. So yeah, the issue we wanted to tackle with this is just that we have in a lot of places incomplete or missing data on greenhouse gases, and even where we do have methodologies, they don't necessarily capture all the moving parts of those. So we wanted to work on that. And we're thinking of the three major products: the long range plan, so the bundle of a lot of projects, the regional solicitation, individual projects that are being evaluated, and even potentially looking at the 4-year TIP. So we're working towards comprehensive science-based estimates that result from projects. So this is everything from the construction greenhouse gases to the operational pluses and minuses, and even potentially looking at the end of life type questions. But we want to keep in mind just practical limitations of being able to implement these. So if we find some of these parts of are small parts of greenhouse gases, we're probably going to put less effort into getting those exactly precise. So and as I mentioned, as part of this, we will be running the new methodologies against the current TPP and past regional solicitation projects, and producing some results. So we'll start to get a sense of what we're getting out of different projects for greenhouse gases, and we'll have those component parts that I think will be a really important part of that conversation and building trust in the estimates that we come up with. And so yeah, the intent is just really to provide better information for staff and policymakers for decision making. So the tasks in the project management includes a project management team that's meeting about monthly. It's a few council staff, and we have MnDOT and MPCA representatives. Innocent is part of that. And we have a technical advisory committee that hasn't met yet, but hopefully by the end of this quarter, we get to meet. So that will be meeting quarterly throughout the project, so probably 6 to 8 meetings to get a glimpse of kind of the draft work products and provide feedback along the way. And then let's see. So we're currently mostly working on test 2 and 3. Test 2 is really looking at the measures that we have in place and not necessarily target at greenhouse gases, but the ones that could be useful for greenhouse gases. Estimating. So for example, you know, if a roundabout project has some kind of modeling with it that produces a delay number, that might be really helpful in understanding induced demand. So really looking at what the data that exists within these processes at current times. So then task 3 is for the consultant to go out and look at best practices, look at some national examples. We want to look at what MnDOT and MPCA have done in the past, both from the perspective of really taking advantage and learning from what they're doing, but also from the perspective of, you know, wherever possible, being consistent with their work, just so that we're not confusing the public. And if we are doing something different, it's for good reason. So then the consultants, you know, with a lot of input from us and our stakeholders, is going to recommend new methodologies that we could implement. The long range plan has reporting of greenhouse gases, but I think some of the assumptions are dated and can be updated. And so we're just looking for those kind of recommendations. In that case, the regional solicitation, my sense is that there's probably a bigger gap to be filled there, and what would be necessary to really get to greenhouse gas estimates to inform that project selection process. So then once we have those new methodologies, we've kind of bought into them, we are going to look at a tool that our community development division has developed that it inventories greenhouse gases in the region. It does a 2040 forecast for a business as usual case. And then the way they're using it is they have general strategies they're applying to that for some scenario planning, general electrification strategies, general transit strategies, and it outputs a number. And in our case, we're looking at much more specific projects. So we're going to have different methodologies we're going to use our tool for. So we're going to take their work as a starting point, update some data, and really extend it as necessary for the regional solicitation and the DPP and potentially the TIP. So once we've done that, we'll run a number of projects through it, get some results, and start to see where things are lining up. We did accept 2 optional tasks from the consultant. One, it was to really help us think about how mitigation might occur. So if a project has negative impacts on the climate, both what is the framework for thinking about mitigation, and then what are the potential strategies that you might actually pursue in that mitigation of a project's greenhouse gases. And then the second optional task that we accepted was doing a deep dive on the regional model that we have and looking at induced demand. What is captured in the regional model, what might not be captured there, how could it be captured better? It's just such a complicated topic, important topic, that we thought some extra resources were worthwhile there. So as you saw, this was documented in the Climate Action Plan. We did start work on this in December. We have budgeted almost $300,000 for this project, and we are actually working on an amendment to add about approximately $45,000 for to evaluate electrification strategies and travel demand management strategies. Those weren't part of the original scope, but we're realizing that those are things we need to be part of this conversation. So that's in the UPWP amendment that's making its way through this time. So the intent is really we're out to all the committees, presenting kind of an overview of the project. Give people a look ahead of what we're up to, chance for some initial feedback, but then to come back towards the end when we have some draft results and you can see what we're coming up with and have another chance at commenting on that. We are working towards informing this upcoming TPP, the 2050 TPP, and then the results from the project can inform I believe it'll be the 2026 regional solicitation. So the evaluation project that's coming up and the 2026 regional solicitation. And then importantly, I touched on, we're forming that technical advisory committee that's meeting about quarterly, 6 to 8 times during the project. And I think we've got pretty good representation from MnDOT, from MPCA, from the counties. We have a few cities signed up, but probably lacking some representation from suburbs and more rural cities. So really welcome any volunteers that want to participate in that. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Tony. Any questions for Tony on this item? Okay, seeing
Chair,
none.
this is Nathan from Minneapolis. Can I ask Tony a question?
Yes.
Tony, if you wouldn't mind going back to slide 2 and you have task 8, can you talk a little bit more about the optional nature of that? I'm curious if, like, with the budget you described, that's actually something that's going to occur, or if that's still undetermined, because I know you said it's complicated and I agree with that, but it seems like it is a pretty important thing, especially as we're looking out to 2050. So I'm not downplaying that. I'm just curious why that may be deemed optional, because it does seem pretty foundational to the work.
Chair and committee members, thanks for the opportunity to clarify that. So optional tasks 7 and 8 have already been accepted, so they are included in that approximately $300,000 budget. And then what's being considered now is an additional $45,000 to look at electric vehicles and induce or travel demand management strategies.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Any final questions on this item before we move on? Okay, we will move on. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks.
Okay, item number 3, potential changes to the 2024 regional solicitation. Steve Peterson and Joe Barbeau.
Chair. Thanks, Mr. Chair. That was going to be me, and it still is for the time being, but there's some weird plumbing stuff going on at my house, so I might have to just pass the buck to Steve at some point in a hurry. So he's on call. So you can flip to the next one. So we're here to talk about the some of the things that we've heard in the surveys and verbally about the solicitation, particularly that pertain to 2024. As we talked about last month, we're going to be conducting a larger evaluation going into the 2026 solicitation. In order to make time for that, our hope as a staff is to use the schedule that you see in front of you, where we'll expedite the process by several months. Finish this up next 2 months from now, and have a public comment period and open the application this year as opposed to next year. So with that in mind, we still want to talk about what should be occurring for the 2024 solicitation, while we're hoping not to get into tearing it apart like we have in some cycles. So next slide. So we made a list of about 10 criteria, and I'm going to talk about each of those and then talk about a staff recommendation. So I think I pointed this out last month, one of the things that we were most hearing about is safety and emissions scoring. Some people thought in various categories those should be worth more points. So We decided to come up with staff recommendations for those. And for safety, we're suggesting increasing the safety for scoring by about 100 points for each, by 100 points for each of the roadway categories, except for bridges, which doesn't actually have a safety measure. So in traffic management technologies, that's a qualitative measure that has just one measure, 100 points to be added, and then 50 points each for the pedestrian safety and standard crash reduction scoring in the other three categories: spot mobility, strategic capacity, and reconstruction modernization. So these discussions are a starting point, and people can give us other ideas, but this is what we were looking at. And we didn't talk about increasing safety on the other categories because they tend to be qualitative in nature, and I think the points that are scored would sort of cancel each other out with any increased value. So this would result in having 1,200 points for 4 categories rather than 1,100 points, which from our standpoint isn't a big deal, but I know we've always had the same number of points across categories. As for emissions, we're not recommending any change for this cycle because we're sort of waiting for the some of what Tony just talked about to go through their process, and then we'll be looking into that for the 2026 cycle. I think we can see if there's any quick questions or comments slide by slide as we move through this.
Any questions for Joe on this slide?
All right, next one. So funding ranges, I think there was some concern, mainly out of TAB, but out of others, that we exceeded the recommended funding range for bike and ped in the last solicitation. So we wanted to point out first that modal funding ranges actually are not necessarily set in stone per rule. As you see the quotation from the solicitation there, that TAB reserves the right to adjust these modal funding levels depending on the amount and quality of projects submitted. So our recommendation is no change to that. And I think the reason is that, you know, that rule provides flexibility in case of maybe something unforeseen occurs. Maybe there's not a lot of applications in some category or some mode, or maybe some extra funding comes through, or maybe there's just a lot of really high cost projects that we have to draw a line somewhere and it kind of fudges the line. But if people you know, want to talk about that, there was some response that rule should be a rule. I think people thought it was a firmer rule than it is, but it turns out it's more of a guidance. But if people want to do anything about that, you know, we can talk about that over the next couple months. I'll just pause and then move on if nobody says anything. So next.
Can we just jump in if we have a question or comment?
Sure.
So I think, so Maddie Dahlheimer, Washington County, I think we're fine with no change with how this one is laid out. But whether it's with the updates for 2024 or the next cycle, we are interested in like the geographic equity or like distribution component with this bike ped category, of just keeping that as a part of the consideration. You know, if we're going outside of the range, where is that? Still trying to keep that regional distribution.
Okay, thanks, Maddie. And I think that there might be a bigger discussion on how or if a geographic balance component should be more integrated into the solicitation going into 2026. That's a big discussion. At this moment, it is a consideration sort of as we're choosing projects on the fringes. But I think that is something that's definitely going to be looked at, you know, in 2026, you know, what the best way to really examine that is. So next.
Joe, if I could, Aaron Milky with Carver County. I think for number 2, I don't think it's not really a change, but we feel it just be a courtesy to have this set somewhat up front before the regional solicitation, that, hey, we are okay going slightly over the boundaries, or we're not. It just helps in developing the scenarios that are developed for funding as well. So that'd be our only comment.
Okay. Yeah, you might have to clarify for me, Darren, what would be different there.
I think at least when you read it, that it was our understanding that we've never gone outside the ranges before. just determining up front, just so we know the ground rules that this truly is the plan to potentially go outside the ranges again for developing scenarios, or it's not. You know, it can be a little wishy-washy, but it just be help. It just is more of a courtesy. It doesn't have to be said, but it just help going forward.
My reaction to that, Darren, would be that we would reiterate that there's flexibility built into this intentionally. I don't think we ever go in intending to exceed any ranges necessarily, but there can be a reminder early on that it's conceivable. So.
Yeah, Joe, mind if I just jump in here too? You make a good point from staff perspective. We did not develop scenarios that went outside of the modal funding ranges. You know, that kind of happened in the last TAC meeting, when we were kind of pushing money this way or that way. But you know, generally, or from when we develop the scenarios, we put them within the modal funding ranges. We sometimes have gone to the top of the ranges in past years for development of a scenario, but we don't go outside of it unless kind of told and to do so. But
And I would agree with that. That we'll stay within the range. And it was only this last time that TAB went outside because of the funding that was available. And they left that in there as a possibility, not that was what they would typically do. So the idea is there was the flexibility that they couldn't tie their hands, but they were going to still try and stay within those ranges.
yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you for the question, Darren. Hopefully that answered, but yeah, I think it's more of just an educational reminder for applicants at that time. And then I think I saw Nathan. Nathan, did you have a question?
Yeah, Chair, I just want to echo what I heard from council staff. And I think if we link back a couple cycles is when we have been too prescriptive with rules. It has put TAC and subcommittees and TAB into corners where the individual projects aren't able to have that flexibility. And I know there might be some recency bias of what happened in 22, but in some cases, things have gone back and forth over the years. So I think putting less rigid rules has definitely been better as compared to trying to prescriptively fit something into a very tight box. It creates unintended issues that, happen at the end. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you for those comments. Steve, response?
No, it was on the, I just want to make sure people are done with this topic. I want to make one other point here, but.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Yeah, okay. Just so back on number one here, I just want to circle back quickly on that one here, because we didn't have any discussion on it, and I assume that we would have more on that. But this, in my opinion, this is the area where we're going to see TAB put most of its focus on the changes for this solicitation cycle. And we heard that kind of loud and clear yesterday. Is kind of where can we have the most impact without kind of throwing the solicitation in, over. And I imagine that this is the place they're going to want to look, and they're going to want to look to some good options from the technical committees to bring forward, because you can get lost in the tables, and you can get lost in the waiting table that we attached, and it gets pretty onerous pretty quickly. But I think it's kind of our role as the technical folks to bring a couple options back up to TAB for their consideration on how to maybe accomplish some bigger policy things that they want to do for, in this case, safety is shown on the screen, but they might not be able to do it alone. They're going to need our assistance. So if people do have comments on, and we just threw one idea out there for safety, there's a 10 ways you could do it. So we did want to garner some discussion, I guess, whether it's this meeting or next on what we should bring back to TAB.
Okay, Darren may have some thoughts on that. Darren?
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm sorry, I didn't realize we'd be asking questions or comments after each slide. I'll say that in general, we're very much in support of safety scores. I guess we would question which safety score you're adding points to. I think Angie Stenson knows this way better than I do, but one of the safety measures is just based on where the project is in relation to the population. And it's not and we would actually recommend tying it to a performance-based score of, is the project actually improving pedestrian safety? I forget. Stop there. That's just a very general high level opinion of this one.
Yeah, so if I can reiterate what I think you're saying here, Darren. So we put, a general, put 100 points more in the roadway safety, splitting those 50 points each for the two measures. One of them is the traditional HSIP benefit cost analysis. The other is this new pedestrian safety measure. What I'm hearing from you is maybe a slant more. If we're going to do more, it should be more points towards what the project's actually doing in the benefit cost ratio.
Correct, because one of them is just based on where the project is, and it may not necessarily really be improving pedestrian safety at all. Whereas the other is the benefit cost of actually what is it doing.
Okay, understood. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good comments. Any other comments now that we're back on slide number 1?
Mr. Chair, this is Carl Keel from Bloomington.
Yep.
So I would just again reiterate that we have to be careful that we make sure that the criteria and the way we score actually discern between projects. I mean, we can give a category more points, but if those points or that category scoring doesn't distinguish between projects, it doesn't change the way we pick projects. So we have to make sure that the criteria is actually contributing to a decision about a project.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chair and Carl, that is kind of why we left out a lot of the safety from the other categories that are more qualitative. And you could make that argument for that first bullet on traffic management technologies. That is a qualitative score. As for the impact, particularly with the cost benefit of crash reduction, that's kind of hard to project in advance of the solicitation, how much spread there will be. But in theory, more points would create a bit more spread.
Yeah, good comment, Carl. Higher
No, I know I always beat on this thing that, I mean, we can have all kinds of criteria that are important, but if they don't help us pick projects, they're really useless.
Yeah, this reminds me of when the staff had that PhD math student in talking about standard deviations and
Yep.
where things, how you pick projects. And so, yeah, I think with all of these adjustments, that's certainly something we need to look at to make sure that the quality projects separate from those other ones through that. Thank you.
Okay, good comment.
All right, I'll turn it back to you, Steve.
All right, thanks. Let's go number 3, agency priorities. So 2 ahead, Bethany, please. Okay, next topic, and we'll be sure to kind of pause between each one here. So one thing we heard in the surveys was this kind of back and forth between maybe our scoring system and what it outputs as the highest priority for the region relative to local priorities. A lot of applicants will submit 5, 10, maybe even more in some cases, some of the bigger counties or cities applications. And so they'll, we heard in the surveys, sometimes we may not fund the top priority for county X or city Y. And should that somehow be considered in our scoring process, whether it's kind of an informational input considered at the end or some other way. This is a good topic and a broad one here. And I wonder, our recommendation in the 2 months that we have to really digest this is that maybe this is better suited for the bigger reevaluation in 2026. We think it has some value, but it's probably going to take a little time to work through to see if people really want to do it or not. But any others on that one?
Mr. Chair, this is Scott Merrick from Ramsey County.
Yeah, go for it, Scott.
Yeah, so this is sort of a big philosophical discussion that we can chase our tail on for quite a while, but my thought is, and I think a lot of other MPOs around the country try to set regional investment priorities, and those priorities sort of direct or guide how the federal funding is invested. In this region, it appears, or it, in practice, it seems like a lot of our investment is driven by the applicant interest. At least that's what I heard from staff recently at a meeting. And that appears to be the preference on how we invest, and based upon what the most popular investment project type is. The last time it was bike trails, I guess. But I guess I would encourage us to pause and think about how we want to approach our strategic investment for our federal funding. If it should be more of a bottom-up applicant interest approach, or more of an approach that considers regional investment priorities. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Scott. Yes, that kind of goes to the overall program priorities, and then which is a good philosophical discussion. And then Steve, my understanding is you're more of like, okay, County X has submitted 8 projects. Now it's down to the wire on picking projects. They'd rather have this project that maybe has a little bit lower score, a little bit below the line, instead of getting the money in this category. Is that kind of what you're getting at with this slide?
Yes, you have different iterations of that theme. Yeah.
Okay. I'll open it up to the group. Any thoughts on this item here? And I know some counties that are representative have spoken up, so it might be good to hear from them as well on this item.
Chair, this is Jason from Hennepin.
Yeah.
Chair, so Hennepin County, we always are supportive of a data-driven approach, and this angle seems to maybe sway from that a little bit. And maybe to take it a step further, both cities, counties, transit providers apply to the solicitation, and it's a little maybe unclear or misleading whose priority you're seeking. Michael, for example, often the city of Plymouth and Hennepin County, we don't agree on what our priorities are. So is this getting at the spirit of Hennepin County's priority that may not be a Plymouth priority? And it just seems like, it's swaying from that data-driven, transparent approach that kind of creates and maintains trust with the public.
All right, thank you for the comments there, Jason. Any other thoughts from?
Chair, I have a question maybe for staff on this one.
Yeah.
I guess my understanding is it is the applicant's prerogative if during the process you want to remove your application that isn't your priority, you could do that through an action through the subcommittees and TAC, correct?
You could, yeah.
So it seems like there is a tool that could be in play if, like, I heard through TAC tab, I think it was more tab of like, well, that wasn't our priority. Like, it could be removed if it's showing is funded in one and it's on the line with another one. It's something that could be done.
Yeah, and my now that we've had a couple people weigh in, my thoughts on this item. I mean, we don't want to ruin good with perfect. It sounds like this would just be another administrative deal. Let's just see where the projects come in and have a discussion. I think this is specific to maybe one agency here, and so my thought is agencies should be submitting their priority projects for the appropriate categories, and I think it's unfair to other agencies if applicants can kind of pick and choose what their priorities are in various categories. I think it's not the intent of the system. I mean, if we have modal ranges and we have funding, I think we just need to follow our process. And if there's some exceptions that the tab wants to make at the end, so be it. But I think we're trying to hit some sort of perfection or another way to look at projects here that I think would just muddy the whole process. So my 2 cents there.
Okay, I think, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think we've kind of heard this is a later topic.
Oh, and I did want to come back, Jason Piper at Hennepin County. Jason, I thought Plymouth and Hennepin County agreed on all priorities. So, okay, Steve, back to you.
No response there. So next slide, please. Next topic is the topic of tied scores, and somehow it tends to work out every session or cycle that we end up with scores right around the funding line that are tied out of what amounts to be 1,100 points. Typically that, it's happened in a couple of categories, but, it seems to always happen in the multi-use trail category where we had 49 applicants. So the scoring is such, and this year was no different. We had a tied score, and that changed things. So, so at the TAB meeting, they were going to fund one of 2 tied score projects, and ended up funding both of those because they didn't want to break a tie. So that made so that was the decision of the TAB. But we did hear a lot of comments in the survey about this, whether is our scoring system precise enough to say one project they're exactly tied as far as the benefits, or should we say there is some flexibility to break a tie for geographic distribution or some other reason that's out there. So I just wanted to garner a little bit of discussion on, should we put something in the application on tied scores to get going into the next solicitation, or should we just keep it as is?
All right, any thoughts from the committee members?
Hey, Maddie Dahlheimer, Washington County. I think from our perspective, we like the idea of the flexibility and kind of how you've laid it out here. One thing that we were wondering with this item was if there is a way, and this is likely for the 2026, but if there is a way to get more specific instructions for scoring narrative components so we can just avoid ties where possible. I know that's hard to do on narrative elements, but maybe something to look at with that larger kind of revamp.
Yeah. Okay.
Steve, your response?
Yeah, I think you're right. Sometimes with qualitative scores, they end up bunching up a little bit, especially. But yeah, is it a front end scoring issue where we should differentiate them in a different way and kind of take a look at the final scores one last time before we set them out, or not? But so good comment. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, this is Ken Ashfeld at Maple Grove. And it seems to me that when you've got various categories and the scores started to bunch up, the funding, for no other term, I'll say the cutoff line, seemed to migrate over to where there's a significant break in the scoring versus, man, if they're tied and you have to do tiebreakers, both of those projects then are good projects. And is there a way to address that issue, even if it meant moving some funding over from one category to another?
Thank you, Ken.
Mr. Chair, this is Cole from Met Council. I don't know that, and Steve, maybe you can tell me this. I don't know that this would be something to put in any of the materials, but it seems like one step is asking either of the applicants if they're okay being, put as the second project. Most are probably going to say no, but I think in some cases we have said, some people have said, oh, we're getting a lot of projects, so we're okay being put, second on the list. But another thing was, I know last time we looked at things like projects that had the highest safety score, And that might be another approach to have Tab say, are there any things that we should consider to break ties that are really high priorities? And again, not sure that that's something we want to put in the application, but something you would probably want to establish ahead of, releasing the applications.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Cole. Yeah, I think that would be an easy way to break ties within our existing system. It's just, what is that tie breaking self score? I've gotten a couple comments from Darren on item number 3 about the agency priorities, and I understand what he's saying here. But Darren, you want to just weigh back in on that? Just to give you a chance to touch base on that one more time.
Sure, I'll combine 3 and 4 together. I mean, for a situation of tied scores, this is where if you're building funding scenarios and you have 2 projects that are tied that are like 7 million or 10 million apiece federal funds, maybe this is a way to, if you have the agency's preference that they'd rather have another project funded in a different category and they're okay being second place, so to speak, on a tiebreaker. This is a scenario where that'd be helpful to build some consensus towards a funding scenario that all or majority of agencies can get behind, so that you don't have a large debate going to tab on where half the group are so-called winners and half the group are upset with where things ended. So that's all I was getting at there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that input. Steve, you kind of understand where he's coming from on that.
Yeah. Yep. He's saying, maybe that's one consideration. That's a tiebreaker.
Okay. All right, Steve, I'll hand it back over to you.
All right. I think we got some feedback there. Moving on. Issue number 5, scoring appeals. We received several comments on how to maybe improve the scoring appeals process. And I think we did improve it from 2 cycles ago to the last cycle, where we had fewer appeals, so we could kind of focus our time at F&P on a smaller number of appeals. So I think that was a good step forward. Continue to get some comments on the appeals process, and so we put out an idea here that the applicant would have an opportunity to have one meeting with the scoring committee chair, council staff, and the applicant, the council staff and scoring chair prior to F&P. One thing that people noted is that they felt a little rushed at F&P to make a decision on kind of really complicated, maybe scoring issues. And so pre-meeting is one solution that we've are proposing, as well as kind of saying that a cutoff, just like the when you submit the application, once you submit the appeal letter, that's the information that will be considered by F&P. That'd be similar to when you submit your application. Things always kind of happen after that fact, but that's kind of the point at which we'll consider that your information kind of final. So those are 2 potential improvements to the process. And one scope item I think we have for the 2026 cycle is to kind of spend more time on the appeals process and how to make it better. But near term, these are a few ideas we wanted to float by the group.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Yep. Comments, feedback from committee members, or maybe anybody that went through an appeal this time around, what worked and what does this look like a good improvement?
Chair, can I just ask that if we do the appeals in a scoring change is accepted by the committee, that staff can just say this project now moves from 5 to 3. So it's like clear as we're going into that of like how either unimpactful or impactful a change is, because that may change the level of scrutiny.
Okay, good comment, Nathan. Darren?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for Steve. So say you go through this meeting with the scoring chair, council staff, we still don't feel like the information is being accepted? Is the appeal process after that, or like a formal appeal to the Funding and Programming Committee, or what are you thinking there?
Yeah, I think the decision point would still be with F&P. This would just give more time to kind of flesh out the details with the scoring committee, who knows the measures better. You know, that's one thing I felt even as the alternate that day at F&P. It was tough to wrap your head around all the different measures and what was being asked in these appeals. So then we'd have a recommendation coming out of the scoring committee that would follow into F&P, but at F&P it would still be the decision-making body on that.
Well, appeal would go to F&P then, like this would like be a pre.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so yeah, like Darren said, yeah, this would be more of a pre-meeting before going to F&P to give the applicant a little more opportunity to understand why the score is, you know, what it is. And there would still be that formal process to going to F&P. So Steve, is it fair to say, I mean, this just adds another touch point with the applicant to be more interactive in that discussion?
Correct. Yeah. And I think if something like this was to go forward, I think clearly we need more, need to put some more kind of details to it as well. Just in thinking through it and talking a little bit here too about what happens at that first meeting, and then what happens at F&P, and where is the applicant involved in that, and to what level. So, you know, as far as presenting to the groups and.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chair?
Yes. Who is that?
That was Elaine.
Elaine, yes.
The tab coordinator. I did want to maybe disagree with a comment from the two speakers ago about including the total score and how it would change the ranking of a project. When scores are done, they're done just looking at a measure and how it should be scored, irregardless of the total points of the rest of the application is receiving. And I would hesitate to say we're just looking at the appealed score, that we would then start looking at how it affects the total score, because it should be only appealed based on whether that measure was misscored or not.
Yeah, understood. And I think it's fair to say that we, for the most part, only receive appeals where a change in the score could be impactful. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Chair, can I clarify my comment, Jolene?
Yep.
It wasn't in regards to like how the appeal from staff and the scorer would look at the score. That should be data driven, exactly how you stated. It's this committee of like, you know, we got a lot of information, we're juggling a lot. And if it's like, okay, we're all approving this appeal, and now the new total score will go from 760 to 840, and that will move this project in that category from 6th place to 4th place when we make that appeal. I think it would just be good information to have of like how much scrutiny we have on like what that change in the appeal and how we review it, what the outcome actually is, not the technical review.
But I guess I think when we get the appeals, it's supposed to be per measure, whether it was misscored or not. And then after a decision is made, then I would say, yes, then here's the new total and here's how it changes. But I wouldn't want it to be factored in the decision that's made of, if you approve this, then that will change the ranking. It should be just on the data, was this measure misscored? If yes, here's the new points, and then if approved, then that would be the discussion of what happens.
Mr. Chair, I have a slightly different comment to Nathan's comment, or response to Nathan's comment. It would have been possible, I suppose, but given the nature of what I assume is the review in question, we were changing points there on the fly, and then that impacts the cost effectiveness score that comes at the end. There was a chance of maybe even providing the wrong information. Things were happening really quickly. I think I did maybe a lesser job than I should have of pointing out, like, this was, I don't remember how many points, it was 35 points, but we have not adjusted yet for the for what that's going to do to the cost effectiveness score. And I think that gave it another 7 points. And that did end up removing it from what Wayne would have guessed 1 spot up. So to Elaine's point, I tend to agree with her philosophically, but it does appear that members are paying attention to that. And maybe some of them even voted one way because they figured it wouldn't move it up. I don't know. So anyway, I will say that if we're messing with scores on the fly, it becomes really hard to provide you with an actual final score.
Thank you for that insight, Joe.
Mr. Chair, this is Scott Merrick again from Ramsey County.
Yeah.
I appreciate this discussion, but I think I just would like to point out to everybody, and I think we already all know this, but there's a lot of discussion about the scores and the scoring appeals and all of this, which I think is important. But the other part of this that I think we are forgetting about is that in addition to the score, the logic or the lack thereof of where the cut line is drawn for the various project categories is equally important in determining what projects are funded. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, my view is, I've been on this committee for, I don't know, 9 or 10 years. I think every cycle they've always gone with the midpoint scenario, except for this last time. So my thought is, and I don't represent TAB, but I think everything should just be put down as the midpoint, taken forward as such. And then if, TAB wants to ask staff to run some different scenarios, so be it. But I'll get off my soapbox here. So Joe, do you still have a comment?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, no.
Okay, Scott, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I guess just to clarify my point there, I think your comment about the midpoint, you're talking about the modal ranges. I guess what I was talking about are there's like, I don't know, 5 or 6 or whatever, or 7 different categories within the roadway plot, for instance. And so there's considerable discretion of staff and where they draw the cut line for spot mobility and safety versus reconstruct versus whatever all those other roadway categories are. There isn't really specific direction from TAB on how that's done. I guess that's the point that I'm making. Thank you.
Okay, good point there. I guess maybe I could ask a question of Joe or Steve. How is that determined within modal categories?
Yeah.
Steve?
Sure. Good question. Something actually we get quite often is how do we draw those lines? And we do it based on the number of projects that are submitted in each category. So, for instance, in the bike ped, there's 3 categories: trails, pedestrian facilities, and safe routes to school. And we essentially go an equal amount down each of those lists. So multi-use trails had a lot more applications. We went further down that list. So, that's the process we've used for the last decade plus, I guess. And we're actively looking at other kind of processes to get there, as long as we can kind of do it transparently and fair. We're going to explore some different things, but that's the way we do it now. So people kind of clearly know where those lines come from. And then, from there, sometimes they go up or down based on kind of tab direction on various things.
So it's safe to say that will continue to be the process unless we kind of approve some sort of a change.
And I would say that this is brought to TAB and is asked, and typically they only revise it because of the geographic balance. So they have discussions, but then they say, well, we don't know what else to do, and nothing changes. So.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Innocent?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I did get one scoring appeal the last time, and this was due to the way the applicants the way they showed the total result. When, For example, they have a project that they have to run a couple of these models and show what the totals are. Then at the end, it was difficult to actually see where their final total was to use in the calculation. So they didn't receive full points since I did not see the specific total point that they have or the result. So, but it was easily corrected after they sent the appeal and show where it was. So we're able to make a minor change. So I think it's really my suggestion would be for these people that do like most of the road calculations, principal, arterial, augmenters, all those, try when you can come up with the total, just show the total result of the calculation, maybe the reduction that you have, make it bold so that people can see, because sometimes when you go through about 5 little pages before you reach what the results are, then you might miss something, might miss the number. So that will only be my recommendation to avoid something like that in the future.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. And yeah, I guess just a note, I mean, anybody who gets their application scored and they do find an error, whether or not they score really high or low, I think it's important to notify staff, appeal it if you think appropriate, because, you know, other people appeal and you think you're a lock for a project, you know, it may bump you down the list. So I think it's just important that if you think that there is a mistake or an error, I'm not encouraging everybody to appeal their scores, but if there's an apparent error in your score, I think it's prudent that you appeal that. Okay, Steve, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. We have next slide, please. Yeah, this was a rule we had talked about last fall, and as currently written in the application, this involves a highway safety improvement program. We say projects may apply for both the regional solicitation and HSIP, but projects can only be awarded funds from one of the two programs. So we do have several projects each cycle that apply for both programs, and the HSIP application says the same exact thing in it. And we need at some point we need people to say which funding source they want to take. But I guess the question at hand is, should we continue to allow people to apply for both? The final decision again will be at the same date. This will be July of 2024. HSIP applications are generally about 6 weeks. And this was a question from last month at this committee about what's going to be if the regional solicitation deadline is kind of mid-December of this year, what about HSIP? So we did have a meeting with MnDOT Metro District and as well as Derek Luer. And typically their application closes about 6 weeks after ours. So that would put it about February 1st for HSIP. So that's maybe one thing to write down, February 1st of next year, 2024 for HSIP. But our recommendation is to continue to allow applications, people to apply for both of them. And just earlier in the process, we do need we had last fall, there was 2 projects that were would have been awarded both. And we'll just have to work harder to ask those applicants which funding source they would like. But did want to bring that back since it's kind of a nitty-gritty detail here on HSIP, but a lot of people do like to apply for a variety of sources, and you never know what you're going to land. So, Mr. Chair, back to you.
All right, thanks, Steve. And I assume if, let's say, a project applied for both, they got both, but they got 3 million more in the regional solicitation, so they would withdraw from HSIP. I assume MnDOT just then goes down their list to fill in candidate projects. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. So that's what happened last time, that it was more advantageous to take the regional solicitation money because the amount was higher. And so then MnDOT Metro District was able to go further down their HSIP list, and we got a couple more projects there.
Okay. Any questions on this item? All right, back to you.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, another rule. This is, well, I call it the bus rapid transit rule, but maybe that's not the right name. But you can see what we have in the current application, and this was in the last 2 applications. And so we say in the paragraph, the combined maximum funding award for bus rapid transit projects funded in the arterial bus rapid transit expansion, and modernization categories will be $32 million. And so, $25 million was for that ABRT set aside. So that left $7 million for other BRT related projects that came from the 2 competitive categories, transit expansion and modernization, which was fine, except that we got a huge influx of money. And so having kind of a static dollar figure in there when you went from 200 million to 350 million in the last cycle caused a little bit of angst amongst our members and kind of how to think through that. We ended up kind of holding true to the rule, just because we said this is the expectation going in, and this was the rule as written. So we did stick with it, and the results of that. But one recommendation we're making, because the funding levels do change, as we saw here last cycle, is that instead of having a dollar figure, then in this case 32 million, we would say something like requiring that at least 2 projects not directly tied to BRT projects are funded. So it's more that the intent of the rule originally was that at least some non-BRT projects would get money, some kind of local bus service that wasn't tied to more of a transit way. And so and we've been doing that. We've actually funded quite a few projects that were on the kind of non-BRT transit projects. And so flipping to something like making sure that there's at least some level of investment outside of the BRT is maybe an approach we'd like to explore here with the group.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Elaine?
One thing I noticed this in our last solicitation, we received a lot more applications related to LRT, which we hadn't in the past, which those type of projects will score higher based on their ridership, similar to the BRT had, which ended up why we created the larger category. And I don't know if you wanted to include that into the BRT rule or not, or have some discussion on that.
Sure, yep.
All right, Innocent, do you have a question, or is your hand up just from the last question?
Don't remove the last one.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, this is Cole. Cole from Met Council. I just wanted to give a little more context for Steve too, that I think that 2 is the appropriate number if we went this route, just because last time when we set the funding amount, based on the midpoint, that 32 million was based on the concept that you'd get at least 2 more projects. So when this was discussed previously, that 2 project number stood out. So I think, this approach would be consistent with past recommendations that were made through both the technical working group for transit and, discussions at TAB.
Okay, thank you, Cole. And Elaine, your comment about the LRT, are you saying that LRT could be one of the 2 projects?
No, well, I was thinking if we wanted to tie that into bus rapid transit in some fashion. But that wouldn't be necessarily the 2 projects. It's we just noticed, I think we had like at least three projects related to LRT, which before we used to get a lot of BRT projects. And so that changed how the other projects scored relative to LRT, and may not have been funded if it hadn't been for the extra money. Are now the LRT applications coming in replacing the high scoring BRT projects and not allowing other types of projects to be funded?
Okay, and I'm not an expert on how that LRT relates to BRT, but I mean, LRT seems like those projects are pretty expensive and can suck up a lot of money pretty quickly. And so I guess I'd be interested to hear, maybe not today, but
Yeah,
eligibility for regional solicitation.
and I think maybe this is something for that transit group to work on, to discuss of whether they would like to see any changes or if it doesn't matter to them.
Yeah, maybe vetting it through a smaller group would be good and reporting back to the larger group. Cole?
Yeah, I just would say that, we got a lot of comments last time about going so far down the list on transit that TAB was uncomfortable. I feel like making more rules that restrict which projects can get the funding is just going to lead to more of that perception of transit. If we have to skip 4 projects, you're at the bottom of the list, and TAB didn't seem to like that. So I think keeping this consistent with what past practice and expectation at TAB is the right approach, and going more restrictive is not a good approach.
Okay, so in that vein, you would agree with the staff recommendation here?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Steve, back to you.
Yes, next slide, number 8. Another item we heard in the surveys was about maintenance of winter maintenance that we have on trails and sidewalk projects that are built as part of roadway projects. So one of the current rules, you remember we spent a lot of time on this maybe 2 cycles ago, was that winter maintenance is a requirement for all kind of standalone trail projects and sidewalks projects. And so we did hear relative, especially to ADA, that this may be a good change to make for roadway projects too, because the roadway projects are building a lot of trail systems, and almost everyone's adding a trail or sidewalk to it. And so this would be an expansion of that existing rule to essentially all projects, including the roadway ones. I guess just the expansion to the roadway projects, I should say. So, certainly this garnered a lot of discussion two cycles ago. So what do people think on this one?
All right, any interest in commenting on this item?
Maybe
Steve,
not.
Out of curiosity, how many more items do we have?
2 more. I think we had 2 more on here.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we're doing fine on time. I was just curious. Anybody have thoughts on this?
Chair, this is Mike Samuelson with MnDOT. Since I support this, but I'm mainly chiming in since this is a good opportunity to remind members that MnDOT is currently engaged in a maintenance study that is focused on our facilities. But it's a good opportunity, I think, to have a lot of discussions around maintenance, particularly winter maintenance across the region. So I know a number of cities that have members on FNP are already engaged, but if folks want to learn more about that, they should definitely reach out to me, and I'm happy to provide some additional information.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So Steve, remind me, so currently with the applications, they have to submit something more for trails for maintenance, but there's nothing for streets because it's just kind of assumed that happens. But this is more to formalize that just for record keeping and ADA requirements. Is that my understanding?
No, yeah. So you're required to submit a letter with the trail applications right now that you're going to commit to winter maintenance on those trails. This would expand it. If you're reconstructing a roadway and adding a trail to it, this would apply to that trail as well. And people assume, people are assuming you're going to take care of the roadway, but what about the trail that you're now adding next to the roadway?
Okay.
That's the issue at hand here.
Okay. I mean, most in my thought is, I mean, it's kind of assumed that would get done, just like how we assume the roads get plowed. But I understand the thinking here just because it's pedestrian focused. But do we have any thoughts from committee members? So it would just be a little more work in the application process for those. Not a huge hurdle, but something additional.
This is Carl Keel from Bloomington. I would agree with staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Carl.
maybe when we bring this to TAC too, there was some language too that, we had that ADA presentation that came to TAC last month, but there's some language around there that's really something we should be doing as a requirement, maintaining all the sidewalks and trails that are federally funded, for sure federally funded, and then, beyond that as well. But
Just as long as you don't say it has to be maintained to a certain quality of no ice or something like that.
yeah.
Those of us who work in cities are getting lots of calls about sidewalks this winter.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been to Bloomington lately, but yeah, I agree with Carl. No, I'm kidding.
Full agreement.
Yeah, okay. I don't see much opposition to this. It sounds pretty common sense. So why don't we move forward, Steve?
Okay, next slide. There's 2 more left. Oh.
Hello.
Innocent, is that?
Oh, yes. I believe I brought this up last time when we went through this, the last solicitation. We do not, we support whatever the cities or counties that are working removing snow or ice on their trails, but I just wanted to bring up that we have some guidelines regarding snow and ice removal in terms of impacts on nearby wetlands or lakes, because most of those trails normally goes through those beautiful areas. And we have some guidelines on a website. I think Mendor also have something, and they've been doing training for council and city staff, or not council, but counties and city staff on snow removal and impacts of those salt that they've been applying. So when doing that, at least please check to see what type of guidelines that we have in applying those salts.
Yeah.
Thank you, Innocent. Yeah, if you have some more information, PCA, that you want to share with the group along with that other document, yeah, that's great. And yeah, my experience with trails, most cities don't salt trails, mostly streets, but yeah, any guidance you have that you would like to share, I think would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Innocent, last cycle you did share some information that we did put the link in the application.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So we did follow through on that, and that was in the 2022 application package.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. 2 more to go here, and we'll get you out of here. But we did receive a few questions on the RBTN. With this advanced schedule, we are not planning to entertain functional class change requests, the truck corridor requests, or bike barriers. But we do want to give people an opportunity to make minor modifications to the RBTN. And I think we did receive one of them here recently. And so that came under kind of three categories versus kind of a brand new RBTN trail wouldn't be one of those. That'd be kind of too big a change. But if you're setting an alignment within an established corridor would be one. And then there's 2 others and maybe Steve Elmer we can send out the exact details of what we did 2 cycles ago. But what we're recommending is that we can still process those changes if people want to make them in advance of this 2024 cycle. I think there's one question I saw in the chat a second ago. I lost it before I read it though.
All right, Darren asked for RBTN, has a change to the RBTN ever been allowed to change tiers in the recent past?
Tier changes. Sorry?
All right, I'll elaborate. We're just wondering if for this one, is this just for switching between tiers? And if so, has that even been, have any of those been approved in the recent past?
Yeah, good question. Steve Elmer, are you on the line here?
Yes,
Okay, I want you to jump in here. Yeah.
sure, I'll jump in. Thanks. No, I guess the answer is no and no. We've never entertained changes to tiering because the tiering was dependent on the original analysis of the original regional bicycle system study back when the RBTN was established. And so it's a complicated methodology. So it's like you really can't do that without redoing the whole thing. So that's never really been a practical opportunity. So we've never offered that as a possibility.
Steve, while you're on the line, what can you go through the changes that you'd be able to process this cycle? Types of changes?
Sure. So like you said, designating an alignment along an existing RBTN corridor. We have minor extensions in there that are considered, and they have to be up to a mile in length. They have to connect to the existing RBTN in some fashion, or to our regional destinations that are designated as part of the RBTN map. And then the third one was a shift in a corridor center line or a minor shift in an existing alignment. So those shifts are minor in that they would need to fall within the existing corridor bandwidth. And for most suburbs, that's 1 mile bandwidth. So yeah, you could move it a half mile in either direction, or same thing for a regional corridor. In the core cities, it's less than that. It's half a mile and a quarter mile in either direction, half a mile bandwidth. So those are the minor changes that we have. We've done it that way for several solicitations, 2016, 2018, 2020.
Thanks, Steve. Darren, did you have any other questions on this item?
No, that clarified it. It may be good what Steve just listed off to make that clear to applicants what are those administrative type changes they'll consider.
Thank you.
I think as the slide goes to TAC, we should put that right on the slide here so people can have that. Last topic area. This is bridges. You may remember shaded in purple, one of the many colors we used in the funding scenarios. What MnDOT provided some additional money to the MPO for what they called the on-system bridge program. That was new money in IIJA that was transferred over from the general fund. So they're unsure if that money will continue into the future post IIJA. But when we were discussing this with the MnDOT planning update work group that has several other local reps on that, Joe McPherson and Mark Culver when he was still at Roseville, and a few others. The thought was on system means on the federal aid system. And so, our current requirements are that you have to be an A minor arterial or non-freeway principal arterial bridge. And one thing we had talked about last summer was that when we go into the next cycle, we should expand that eligibility at least down to include all the federal aid system. So that would include what we used to call B minor arterials, and then major and minor collectors in the urban area, and then major collectors, but not minor collectors in the rural parts of the region. So this would expand that eligibility downward so that we know we're giving funding to essentially the worst bridges on our system. I think that was the intent of this on-system bridge program. I didn't assume that we'd kind of go upward with the functional class. So right now, non-freeway principal arterials are the highest functional class. And, theoretically, the full functional class that's eligible is all the way up to the freeways. Typically, so I was assuming we would just kind of expand the eligibility downward versus down and up. But I guess that's the topic we want to talk about. We're unsure if on-system bridge is going to continue or not, but to be ready for it, should we expand that eligibility to make sure we're funding the worst bridges on our system that are eligible. I think I wore everyone out maybe, but
no, that's good. And Steve, this year the legislature they're maybe considering a local road bridge program or doing a set aside with that as well. So I mean, that if that does move forward, I mean, that would put quite a bit of money towards local bridge opportunities that are currently on the list for replacement for counties and cities.
Good.
All right, thoughts on this?
Chair, this is Jason from Hennepin County.
Yeah, Jason.
I support this change in the eligibility requirements for the bridge category.
Thank you for that feedback.
People can think about it a little bit more too. It's maybe a lot to take in, but what the implications would be of it. But
all right, well, you got feedback from Jason.
So, all right.
So we'll do what Hennepin County wants. All right. Thank you, Jason, for the feedback. But yeah, I assume with all of these items, people, if they have thoughts or comments and want to share with you, I mean, they can email staff for more feedback, and this will be going to TAC. Is it at the next meeting?
Yeah, March 1st. Yep.
March 1st. Okay.
Yeah, but maybe just to round out the presentation, a tab, another kind of technical topic we heard about was, should we have a minimum score for funding of applications, whether it's kind of a percent of the top score, or is there a score cutoff where it's either a guideline or a rule that tab should consider as we kind of make our way down these lists? We fully funded several of the project lists, and there's probably benefits, positives and negatives to instituting something like that. But that was one request that we had at the tab yesterday from one of the tab members. So give that a little bit of thought moving forward too, about kind of is there a minimum, some sort of minimum where we can want to build the funding scenarios off of.
Yeah, my thought is hopefully agencies are submitting projects that have merit, for the community. And so if we set some arbitrary goalposts, while good intentions, I mean, it could have unintended consequences and discounts maybe a project that's really good, but maybe just went against some other difficult projects. So I would just, a lot of thought needs to go into that before just making some arbitrary line in the sand.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can add on to that, this is Cole again. Just having reviewed transit applications for a long time too, and I know this is where a lot of the scrutiny came. The difference between a score for usage on Blue Line versus a proposed suburban local route is so it's extreme. You don't have those extremities on, the roadway system, where we've taken the principal arterials out of the discussion. So I agree with you. I think it's not an appropriate approach, and unless we do some sort of rubric-based scoring, where it's not relative to all the other applications, it's just sort of if you're above this line, you get this score. If you're below this, you get this. Then I could see that being more of an appropriate approach. But the relativity part gets really skewed by major projects in transit, and I think that's where some of the scrutiny came through this last time.
And it
Yeah.
also is dependent on a number of applications submitted. And just especially in the transit category, they limit which ones they submit versus submitting every project that they could do. So then you may have all good projects, but they are scored against each other, versus if twice as many projects came in, the total scores would not be at the bottom, but they'd be in the middle. So it is dependent on number of applications submitted in each category too. And that's another example would be the traffic management technologies. Prior years, we received maybe up to 10 applications and you fund half of them, 5. Well, this time we received 4, so you funded half, that was 2. So are you funding the priorities based on how they scored versus what else was submitted?
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. Yeah, I think that comes back to, let's not set any arbitrary rules. Let's score the projects and then TAC. I mean, we have a process to further vet different items. So, and Steve, you said that was just a question from a TAB member. Is that
correct? Yes. Yep. And I committed that we would at least explore that topic a little bit more prior to this cycle. So I think we'll bring it up at TAC again and go from there. And I know we're running short on time here too, but you know, you kind of saw the types of changes or potential changes that we'd like to explore here, but did want to give just a minute or a couple minutes to, if there's people that or other topic areas that you think we should tackle next month or even at the TAC committee here March 1st, that are kind of on the same level of changes that you heard in the surveys. We do want to at least open that up for comments too with the group.
Okay.
We got 10 items here, but we you know, you could always do 10, 11 or 12.
Yeah. Oh, and then Darren in the chat asked if staff is looking for a formal letter for all of these 10 areas. I mean, you can always send a letter to staff, but we're just kind of kicking off the discussion. But yeah, Darren, if the county wants to send something formal, that I'm sure staff would accept that, and that would get tied into the overall discussion. Do any members have any other items that they want to add onto this agenda, in addition to the 10 that Steve presented here today?
Chair, this is Jason from Hennepin.
Yeah.
More like a question and observation than like a recommendation. But as we're getting more familiar with these bus rapid transit projects, you know, where they install stations, you know, every quarter or half mile with the platforms, you know, those have pretty large impacts to our roadway systems in terms of, you know, wanting to get people there safely and accessibly, you know, in terms of pedestrian infrastructure, you know, safety countermeasures. And really, we're having a lot of challenges at Hennepin syncing up our delivery of our roadway projects with the transit projects. And I don't know if a lot of it's due to the flavor of the federal funding, where the transit money is coming through the FTA, but the roadway money is coming through FHWA. So I don't know if this cycle is the right avenue, or maybe the next one in 2026, if there's any way to promote efficiencies there. Because as you probably saw in a few scope change requests and tip amendments, you know, Hennepin County, we were here a lot, and a lot of the examples were roadway projects that were, you know, maybe not directly related, but nearby BRT projects. And it required a lot of paperwork, and we're running out of paper here at Hennepin. So maybe just tasking Met Council to maybe look into how we can explore some opportunities.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. That's something we've heard from Hennepin County a few times here, and it's probably a bigger conversation, but well noted, and we'll keep at that topic area.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the comment, Jason. Any others? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Steve, for that overview, and look forward to continued discussion on this item at TAC.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Right on time.
Okay, other business. We do not have any other business today, so I will move to adjourn at 3 o'clock. Thank you, everybody.